away from a national primary. And I want to ask all of you this simple question. There's a very good chance none of you are going to have enough delegates to the Democratic National Convention to clinch this nomination. Okay? If that happens, I want all of your opinions on this. Should the person with the most delegates at the end of this primary season be the nominee, even if they are short of a majority? Senator Sanders, I'm going to let you go last here because I know your view on this. So instead, I will start with you, Mayor Bloomberg.
Whatever the rules of the Democratic Party are, they should be followed. And if they have a process, which I believe they do,
I'm trying to do
so
this,
that
yes or no to make it fast.
everybody can.
So you want the convention to work its will?
Yes.
Senator Warren.
But a convention working its will means that people have the delegates that are pledged to them, and they keep those delegates until you come to the convention. All of the people.
All righty. Vice President Biden?
Play by the rules.
Yes or no? Leading person with the delegates, should they be the nominee or not?
No, let the process work its way out.
Mayor Buttigieg?
Not necessarily, not to lose.
Senator Klobuchar?
Let the process work.
Senator Sanders?
Well, the process includes 500 superdelegates on the second ballot.
I've shown this video before, and maybe you guys are like, dude, I'm sick of that video. But I have to be honest, that moment sticks in my mind because that is a mind-blowing video. Why do I think that's a mind-blowing video? I think that's a mind-blowing video because it gets across the scam or the con. For the longest time, and look, this video is a persuasive video. It's specific to lefties and independents, people who may lean Democratic, who may have even backed Sanders in this particular race, people who wanted something fundamentally different, who had all of these policy ideas that they wanted, people who say, I want Medicare for all, I want the expansion of college, I want the expansion of Social Security, meaning paying out college debt and expansion of Social Security. Those are things that I want. I want a wealth tax, I want an increase of taxes on the rich. Those are the things that I want, including minimum wage and Green New Deal. And you find out that those items are popular, meaning you win the ideological argument, but you end up losing this issue of electability, and they end up going with Joe Biden. That moment in the race, we've been told Donald Trump eats babies, Donald Trump kicks puppies, Donald Trump is putting people in concentration camps. We've been told that Donald Trump is alienate us from around the world. He is corrupt. He's working with Vladimir Putin and the Russians to undermine and destroy America. We have been told all of these things. We've been told all of these things. We've been told all of these things for the last 3 years. And yet, what do you believe takes place if they went through with this? If everyone on this stage gets what they wanted, when Warren, Bloomberg, all of these people, if it goes to the end process, Sanders has more delegates. Go back in time. At this moment, all of them believed Sanders was going to win. It goes to the end. Sanders has more delegates. What do you believe takes place after that? They rip it away from Sanders. Now, right now, at this moment, 15% of lefties back Trump based on the polling. What do you think that number goes to if Sanders has more delegates and they rip it from Sanders? What I'm trying to get across to you is, if they do that, Democrats lose. There is no situation where the Democratic Party could have a Sanders win in delegates and they rip it away from them and expect to beat Trump. Meaning, the first priority in this race wasn't to beat Trump. It wasn't to find the strongest candidate. The first priority in this race was to effectively to stop Sanders. Trump was always a secondary factor. It means that the Democratic Party was literally willing to lose to Trump if it meant stopping you and your guy, despite the fact that Sanders, if you're doing for a matchup, has the best matchup against Donald Trump. The public might have chose Joe Biden, but the public is propagandized too pretty heavily by mainstream media and, for the most part, the parties. What they consider to be normal, what they consider to be the most natural politician in the world, is just basically what the Democratic Party is. That's a relative normality. That's not necessarily the best candidate. Again, that's what they're familiar with. Hillary Clinton lost. John Kerry lost. Al Gore lost. Joe Biden is effectively the same politician. Obama, yes, is still part of that ilk, but the difference is, if you remember, Obama ran that race like he was a radical, screaming hope and change from pillar to post, and they also back then called him risky in the same way they call Sanders. It was the radical that ends up winning that race, not the other establishment Democrats, meaning all things being equal, let's take away the coronavirus and the quirk associated with that. Biden loses. He has 24%, the enthusiasm in regards to his campaign. The overwhelming majority of the younger voters, I think like 70, 80% was going to Sanders. And so you have a situation where septuagenarians and octogenarians are going to be walking around giving mailers out and knocking on doors for one Joe Biden. My point is very straightforward. They were literally willing to lose to a man that they say is the apocalypse if it meant stopping your guy. All notions that if you back the Democrats like you have over the last 40, 50 years, if you get your guy, if you get your shot, if you get your chance, you have somebody that's popular, they're going to also back you. Clinton wasn't willing to back you, and each and every one of these people basically said, yeah, we'll lose to Trump if it stops Sanders. You had anti-Sanders meetings, so this is not necessarily my conjecture. This is literally true. Even using Warren, by the way, to split the vote. I mean, all of that was crucial in defeating Sanders. I don't absolve Sanders of blame in this, so don't misunderstand me. I'm just making the very basic point that the Democratic Party, the party that many of these people supporting, that many of you support, reflexively was willing to give it over to Trump if it meant stopping you. And yet, from your standpoint, the argument that they used to use, you have nowhere else to go. Meaning, they were willing to do what they continuously tell you and scare you not to do. You are typically terrified of the boogeyman of the Republican, and I understand it's a fearsome animal. By the same token, your party was willing to give over the farm if it meant stopping you. Joe Biden, most likely, all things being equal, providing you don't necessarily, again, the corona issue, will lose to Trump. And, I say that to just make the very basic point that they didn't care that Joe Biden would potentially lose to Trump. The entire point was that Joe Biden could suck up the black vote, which was enough to basically beat Sanders. The very next act in which Joe Biden loses to Trump will be to immediately blame lefties and the people that didn't back Joe Biden for him losing to Trump, which is always a weird argument to me. Your entire goal, your objective is to be able to get votes. There are going to be some people who vote for you, some people that don't. Your objective is to get votes. The notion that you're blaming people who don't vote for you, they don't owe you their vote. They vote for whoever they want to for whatever reasons that they make their votes. If they didn't vote for you, they weren't Democrats. If they did vote for you, they were. Your goal is to get more Democrats. The voter shaming is absurd, ridiculous, and I got to be honest, pretty pathetic. It is your candidate's responsibility to get the votes that your candidate needs to win. My very point, fear is not a position to take that allows you to win, especially if your objective and your goal is to get policy. It is true that Bernie Sanders flamed out of this race, but your objectives at this point needs to be untethered from Sanders. And I understand people are dejected, people are feeling some kind of way about it, but I would make the argument that being untethered to Sanders may be your best bet forward. Choose 5 policies and refuse to vote for any random Democrat if they're not backing those policies, especially since you know those policies are popular. Make an argument and say, this is what we want, and make that argument en masse. And in making that argument en masse, that we are not willing to settle for these policies. Test us. You will lose, and we will make you lose. Consider for the moment if you did that back in 2016. If you told Clinton, you will lose if you do not back these policies. These are the policies we want. If you don't back this, you will lose. And say it en masse. And when Clinton lose, and all of them are saying, oh, those Bernie people got us lost. And you say, God damn right we did. And we will do it again the next time. Clinton lost anyway. And she lost with you having any additional clout in the political process because you have no leverage in the political process. What would have happened in 2016 if, for the most part, you would have taken that strident position of you will lose if you do not back these particular policies? In 2020, you would have been in a much stronger position to make that argument that you will lose if you do not back these policies, especially since you would have had 2016 under your belt of having that level of credibility and that level of leverage to put on the political space. It's less relevant whether the Democratic Party wants it or not. Joe Biden is an individual, and Joe Biden has been running for president his entire life. You actually may be able to force certain policy concessions on him if he actually believed that you could come together in any real concerted way to ensure that he loses. There's something else that I want to see before I flip over on this from the standpoint of the left. The Democratic Party, who basically needs you for your vote, has needed you for your vote over the last 40, 50 years, was willing to treat you as if you were Trump supporters. Meaning when they said Trump supporters are racist, sexist, bigoted, etc., they did the exact same thing to an element of their own party, meaning Democrats and left-leaning Democrats, or let's say progressive independents. They were willing to do that in a heartbeat to members of their own party and was willing to do it for weeks on end. MSNBC was one of the worst offenders in this. I'm just making the very basic point that they did not respect you enough and believed that there would be consequences for them talking about you in these derisive ways. One example, and this example was shown over and over and over again. I can even show you the video where apex predator Harvey Weinstein, who was a close friend of Hillary Clinton, effectively calling Sanders sexist. How ironic.
There's a ceiling. There is nowhere to go, but there is no up to go. And all of those support, I actually overheard someone saying that I thought was an interesting point, that basically at this point, if you are still supporting Sanders as opposed to Warren, it's kind of showing your sexism because she has more detailed plans and her plans have evolved. I thought it was an interesting point, and I think there may be something to it.
Yeah, I agree with all that.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I agree with everything that you just said there. Think about what we're saying here. They did this for months. Sanders is sexist. Sanders is sexist. Sanders is bros. Sanders is only getting the white vote. Sanders is all of these white voters that are attracted to him. Invisibilizing the women that were associated with the campaign. Invisibilizing the people of color that was associated with the campaign. It is true that Joe Biden was getting the African-American vote, elderly. If you're talking about the youth vote, under 35, Sanders was getting that in spades. I'm making the very basic point that not only were they willing to lose to Trump if it meant stopping you, your movement, and your particular policy objectives, and yeah, Sanders being the avatar of that, they were also attacking and slandering you in the process, going beyond hitting Sanders, but also attacking you directly. I'm making the point that they didn't respect you enough to not do that, and in a heartbeat were willing to treat you like Trump supporters because they, for the most part, just assume that you are going to be so terrified that it doesn't matter what they say to you, doesn't matter what they say about your candidate, doesn't matter if they attack your policy priorities. At the end of the day, you have nowhere else to go. And cowardly, you will put back on your gimp suit and you will knuckle under and back somebody who in no way is going to back your policy priorities. 50 years. At some point, do something different. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal, Patreon. This content is brought to you by you. And your engagement with this channel makes this channel work. So I appreciate you guys for giving me the opportunity to do it. Also, definitely, like I think I said before, hit like and share. The reason why I showed that in the beginning is because I wanted you to understand the lengths that your opposition, and by opposition I mean the Democratic Party, was willing to go in order to stop you and your policy priorities. And again, this is not a situation where your policy priorities weren't popular. You won the ideological argument in the context of the public saying, yes, we believe Sanders was better on economics. We believe he was better on the Green New Deal or the environment. We believe he was better on tax policy. We believe he was better on healthcare across the board. We believe he was better. One catch, electability. And that's the argument that Sanders didn't necessarily want to make, at the very least not make it pointedly, making the point that Joe Biden can't get elected. In fact, he did the opposite of that. And I'm sorry, that was grossly irresponsible. If Sanders honestly didn't want Trump to win, he should have done two things. He should have been harsher on Joe Biden, meaning you need to test Joe Biden's jaw. It's a competition. Your goal is to see whether or not your candidate can deal with what is going to take place in the general election, meaning Sanders not bringing up Hillary Clinton emails may have actually hurt Hillary Clinton because Hillary Clinton wasn't inoculated from that in the general. I know he understood he was thinking that he was doing some kind of ethical favor, but just because you think you're doing the right thing doesn't necessarily mean the consequences of that always turn out good. He was still smeared and attacked as being responsible for Hillary Clinton losing that race, not to mention his supporters. Oh, and yeah, blacks not being sufficiently loyal. Fuck you on that one. So from the standpoint of this race, lefties need to strongly internalize that you are not going to get what you want in the party. And again, there were levels of existence that they were willing to go in order to prevent you from doing such. the canard, the lie that you've been given by various elements of the party, the self-serving lie, I would argue, from places like MSNBC and the Cedars of the world. They've been doing that in order to sheepdog you into the party. Right now, Sanders is doing the same and has gotten on board making this argument that Joe Biden is electable. Again, if you want to get your policy priorities accomplished, you are far better off stating your demands in regards to what you want and not having a race to the bottom on those policy priorities, making the argument that we may not have the capacity to win at this point, but we do have the capacity to make you lose. And you will lose to the point where you no longer exist as a party until you accept these policy priorities. Someone, craven politician or some ideological actor, will come along and pick up those policy priorities just for the getting the bill, just to take power. I don't care if the Democratic Party burns to the ground at this point. What I care about is getting my policy priorities accomplished. If you're a lefty, if you're a progressive, if you're a socialist, if you're a communist, if you're a whatever, independent, Republican, I don't care. 5 policies, the most popular items, push for those, and be willing to basically go to the mat in the same way that the Democratic Party was willing to go to the mat. It's not that I love it. It's more so that I'm no longer playing this game that these guys are engaged in, where it's red team, blue team. I am making the point that the objective is to get policy accomplished. And if there is a mass movement behind getting policy accomplished, specific objectives accomplished, where you are sending somebody with a very specific itinerary, go do this, go do your job, and make that argument, go do your job. In fact, that should be the refrain, go do your job. These are the policies that the American population wanted. Go do it. And you're not getting our support until you do it. And you're going to lose until you get to that point. This is the man that we have been told is going to hold back the night of Donald Trump.
Kinds of things that have to be done. There's during World War.
By the way, just so we're clear, he's reading his notes. He's reading notes in the middle of an interview. I've never seen anything like this before, but let's keep going. This is the guy that's going to stop Trump.
Kinds of things that have to be done. There's during World War II, where Roosevelt came up with a thing that was totally different than he called it the World War II. He had the War Production Board. Kinds of things that have to be done.
That's not a thing. I'm just saying that's not a thing. And he couldn't even get it out. Joe Biden has also gotten to the point of having interviews with his wife sitting with him. I still say his wife doesn't in any way love him. And Whoopi Goldberg, whether she knows this or not, she's not a medical doctor, Whoopi Goldberg. So no, she wouldn't necessarily be a great surgeon general. But the wife that doesn't love him, that allows him to sit here and embarrass himself like this on one television network after the next and run for president when he is clearly cognitively in no shape to do this particular job, she sits by him, I suppose, for moral support and maybe even to make sure he doesn't necessarily go too far off the rails and to take over when he doesn't have the intellectual capabilities or powers to do so. But let's hear Joe Biden. By the way, they're telling us that this man is the one to go up against Trump. Do you honestly trust Joe Biden to play with matches, let alone an oven? Do you believe that this is a man who can rationally and sit there with cutlery without injuring himself accidentally? Or is this the guy who can find his way out of a Walmart women's clothing department section? I don't think so. But this is the guy Bernie Sanders and everybody else in the mainstream media is now telling us is ready for president. The guy who is doing interviews with his wife.
I sat with a guy yesterday on a telephone, and he's telling me, he said, I don't know. He said, look, I worked at the hospital. And he said, then I got myself in a position where I got the virus. So they quarantined me and they put me in the hospital, and I made it out. And so I'm out, but they don't want me with my family. I'm on the 3rd floor. I spent 15 minutes on the phone with him saying, he said, I have a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old. And they come to the door outside and they just knock on the door and say, Daddy, can I see you, Daddy? Can I see you, Daddy? So we spent time going through it. I used to do it with my kids when they were little and I couldn't see them, and we'd play games. I said, make up a game, knock on the door and say, this is, it's practical things. The guy's scared to death. And he's worried about his children. He's worried about his wife. I mean, these are practical things. And the president talks about this like okay, it's going to be okay. We're going to open tomorrow. We're going to do this. I mean, I must tell you, it drives me crazy. I don't know what he doesn't understand.
Drives me crazy too, Joe Biden. Drives me crazy too. Joe Biden makes up these stories like this, right? I mean, keep in mind, he made that story up about supposedly firing the guy in the Ukraine. He actually did get the guy fired. Joe Biden actually goes 8 hours. It actually took months on end in order to get the guy fired. Made up the story about the civil rights. Made up the story about the South Africa and Mandela. Embellished even on the made up story of the one in South Africa, saying that Mandela even thanked him for his efforts. Joe Biden is now being accused of rape. Joe Biden has shown one case after the next of flagrantly lying. Joe Biden has talked about cutting Social Security over the course of his career and then lied about it afterwards. Joe Biden has had one treacherous interview after the next. Joe Biden has not had the cognitive wherewithal to win any of the debates. And even when he's been in these interviews, they've had to gently lead him because he's been so atrocious without having the ability to speak extemporaneously. I guess I'm making the point to you that, is this the guy that you really want? Like, are you so terrified of Trump that you're willing to accept this guy as your president of the United States? Now, look, there's some Democrats out there that would be proud to have Joe Biden. But I'm talking to lefties and independents, the ones who actually want real things. It's not oriented just around party. What are the policies that you want? And do you honestly believe that Joe Biden or the Democratic Party in any way is for those policies, especially after the way they behaved in 2020? They lined up in its entirety to stop your guy and the policies that your guy was pushing. Joe Biden went so far as to say if Medicare for all was passed, he'd veto it. So, basic question, what is your objective? And if your objective is policy, you spent 50 years kowtowing, folding yourself into a Democratic Party that basically told you you have nowhere else to go. When Obama gave 95% of the income gains to the top 1%, you have nowhere else to go. When he did the drone bombing, you have nowhere else to go. When he deported 3 million immigrants, you have nowhere else to go. When Bill Clinton destroyed welfare, destroyed Glass-Steagall, again, you have nowhere else to go. One position after the next that was against your interests and the things that you wanted, and you were always told you have nowhere else to go, and you continuously folded into the Democratic Party on this without ever getting your policy priorities accomplished. And now they are giving you Joe Biden. I guess I'm making the very basic point to you that if a large part of the population wants change, why are you willing to accept Joe Biden? And how would you ever get that change if you are indeed willing to always accept somebody like Joe Biden? My argument is very basic. Do something different. Start en masse making this argument of, no, we are not going to support you unless you do your job. And you create an itinerary of what that job is. Yes, it is possible that Joe Biden loses this race. And at the end of that, say you were told that you were going to lose this race because you didn't support this particular agenda, and you will lose the next one if you don't again. That's your way to getting some level of political power. You get credibility in the fact that they lost. But beyond the credibility in the fact that they lost, you get the opportunity to be able to influence your will onto the political space for the first time in 40 or 50 years. But that pathway is not through cowardice. That pathway is through this ability of saying, when they say you have nowhere else to go, to say, yes, we actually do. We are not going to support you. Null is a position. That's not voting for Trump. That's not voting for anybody. That's saying, I don't like the choices that I have at my disposal. And in the case of trying to get your policies accomplished, you're never going to get those accomplished from the Republican Party. So the influence that you are trying to put is on the Democratic Party. You are not a Democrat. Stop considering yourself one. Consider yourself policy-oriented in regards to the way you're trying to get things accomplished, and look at the political parties as things to influence. If you get somebody in there that works on your favor, great. Otherwise, pressure, pressure, pressure. Not pressure in the, we're going to out-protest. Pressure in the sense that we have the capacity to make you lose when you don't win another election. At some point, that may actually organize into something that's more of a brain trust and more of a party and more of some political organization where you guys can talk, chat, and we come up with ideas in regards to what we want to stand for. But I would say in the beginning of it, you start off with 3, 4, 5 basic policies that you want appropriated and that you are willing to go to the mat for. You're not alone in this, by the way. There are multiple groups. progressive youth groups issue a list of demands to Joe Biden. Now the catch becomes, do they actually believe it? If they don't necessarily stand by it, well, there's that. Here's another group of people or organizations that are, again, against and not endorsing Joe Biden. You're at a coronavirus with 680,541 people have been infected, 34,723 have died, and the leading person who's on the Democratic Party side is saying, I would veto Medicare for all. 9.2 million workers lost their employer-provided health insurance, and the leading Democrat says, I will veto Medicare for all. Why is that acceptable to you? These are the food lines in California, Los Angeles. This is in the United States. All of these cars out of food. This is your moment as lefties. I understand Sanders flamed out, but this is your moment to make your argument. You already know your policies are popular. Stand on some level of principle and say, no, you would never get what you want, however, through issues of cowardice. I'll leave this here. Like, share, subscribe. Ben Rowley, could you reach out to Papi Chulumin? Also, could you debate Varish for voter shaming? I don't know who Varish is. Cannabis sativa. There needs to be progressive takeover on a state level. Maine has a DSA and a Green Party person running. They have ranked choice voting. I got to be honest. The people voting shaming, I think those people are idiots. So I have no, it's their choice. But that didn't work in 2016. And if you are going to continuously do something that didn't necessarily work the first time around, yeah, I think you're idiots. As for trying to get people to vote for your candidate, it is your candidate's job. I don't even understand the argument that it's somebody else's job to do that. That's the weirdest thing in the world to me. Maggie Smith, ask yourself who is making the decisions. Joe cannot. We don't know what the group is. That's right. Joe and his running mate will be figureheads. Ask who decides. That's right, Maggie Smith. That's always a question. Who decides? And what's the other one? You did two of the same chat? Okay, that's weird. All right, I'm going to end this here. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks all.